Evaluate the integral. The integral is x squared times the sine of pi times x times dx. And we're going to go ahead and solve this by integration by parts. So we're going to let u equal x squared, and dv is going to equal sine pi x dx. So we take the derivative of both sides. Du is going to equal 2x dx. And now we need to find the antiderivative of the sine pi x dx. So remember, when we do that, we're going to have to do u substitution. So we let u equal pi x, du is equal to pi times dx, divide both sides by pi, and therefore dx is equal to 1 over pi du. So we want to integrate the sine of u times 1 over pi du. We factor out the 1 over pi, and we get the sine of u du. So we have 1 over pi times negative cosine of u, and that would be plus c. And so therefore, we end up getting the following. We get negative 1 over pi times the cosine of pi x plus c. And so all we're concerned about is this. And so therefore, that's what v is going to equal. So we have negative 1 over pi times the cosine of pi x. Okay, so now let's go ahead and then write our original integral, which is x squared times the sine of pi x dx. And we know integration by parts is going to be u times v minus v du. So we know that u is x squared, and we're multiplying it by v, which is negative 1 over pi times the cosine of pi x minus v du. Well, we know that v is negative 1 over pi times the cosine of pi x times du, which is 2x dx. Now let's simplify this just a little further. So we have negative 1 over pi times x squared times the cosine of pi x. We know that we have a negative times a negative, which is a positive, and then 1 over pi times 2 is 2 over pi. And so then we have the integral of x times the cosine of pi x dx. Okay, so what do we notice here? We notice that we now have to then use the integration by parts again for this integral, because we have x times the cosine of pi x. So now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to then use the u substitution. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have x times the cosine of pi x dx. Okay, so using the u substitution here, okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to let, if we want, we can use capital U's and capital V's so we can distinguish between the two. So capital U is going to equal x, and d capital V is going to equal the cosine of pi x dx. So if we take the derivative of both sides, we have du, which is equal to dx. And then we want to find the antiderivative of the cosine of pi x. Okay, so what is the antiderivative of the cosine of pi x? Well, we'd have to follow the same procedure. So in order to find the antiderivative of the cosine of pi x dx, Okay, what do we know about u? We're going to let u equal pi x du is equal to pi dx, and then 1 over pi du is equal to dx. So we would have the following: the cosine of u times 1 over pi du. So we would get 1 over pi times the cosine of u du, and the antiderivative of the cosine of u is going to be the sine of u plus c. So therefore we get 1 over pi times the sine of pi x. So therefore this is 1 over pi times the sine of pi x. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and say x times the cosine of pi dx is going to equal uv minus the integral v du. So we have x times 1 over pi times the sine of pi x minus v, which is 1 over pi times the sine of pi x times du, which is dx. And so now we have 1 over pi times x times the sine of pi x, and then we can factor out the 1 over pi, so it's minus 1 over pi times the integral of the sine pi x dx. Well, if you notice here, we already solved for the integral of the sine of pi x dx, and we got negative 1 over pi cosine of pi x. So that's going to equal 1 over pi times x times the sine of pi x minus 1 over pi times negative 1 over pi times the cosine of pi x plus c. So now let's distribute. So we have 1 over pi times x times the sine of pi x plus 1 over pi squared times the cosine of pi x plus c. And so this is what we're going to substitute into this part here. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have the following. We have negative 1 over pi x squared times the cosine of pi x plus 2 over pi and then we're going to multiply it by the following. We have 1 over pi x sine pi x plus 1 over pi squared times the cosine of pi x plus c. And so because we're going to be distributing this 2 pi to this c, right, we're going to call this c now c1, and you'll see why in this next step. So now let's go ahead and distribute and simplify even further. So we have negative 1 over pi x squared times the cosine of pi x, plus we're going to distribute this 2 pi to that term, which becomes 2 over pi squared times x times the sine of pi x, and then distribute it again, plus 2 over pi times pi squared is pi cubed times the cosine of pi x, and then we're distributing it to c1, which gives us plus 2 pi times c1. Okay, and so now we're almost done. Now we just need to say, okay, well, negative 1 over pi x squared times the cosine of pi x plus 2 over pi squared times x times the sine of pi x plus 2 over pi cubed times the cosine of pi x. And then what we're going to call this is we're going to let c now equal 2 pi times c1. So therefore this would be plus c, and therefore there is our result.